In December of 1996, a little over a year and a half after the release of D, Warp would release the Sega Saturn exclusive Enemy Zero. Now, this isn't a direct sequel to D. However, there are enough similarities that it is generally considered to be a follow-up. For starters, the game again stars Laura. Sort of. This isn't Laura Harris, it's Laura Lewis. Still, she has what seems to be a graphically improved version of the same face, and is, again, a silent protagonist. As with Aki Rose from Final Fantasy The Spirits Within, Laura was intended to be a digital actress that appeared across multiple titles. This Laura is a researcher aboard the Aki. No, not the fake lady I just mentioned. This is a spacecraft that looks an awful lot like a castle. In a cutscene that takes up almost the entirety of the first disc, or Disc 0 as it's known, we see that an invisible creature being kept in containment on the ship has escaped, which, of course, can't be good news for those on board. As with D, this intro is very well done, and even ups the ante a bit in the music department, as it was scored by composer Michael Nyman. After switching to the disc labeled as a first, you get to finally start the game. Initially, you're in Laura's room, with gameplay that is basically identical to D. You press the direction you want to move in, and see a pre-rendered scene of your movement. If you want to interact with something, you press A. In Laura's room, there is a terminal with various features, such as a map, an information database, and a video phone to let her communicate with the other crew members aboard the Aki. Most of the characters can't be reached, but there is one character, Ronnie, who accepts your request and gives you advice. However, it's after trying to communicate with your fellow officer, Parker, that you realize something is wrong. You're treated to a camera feed of his room, which, while grainy, reveals what is definitely a bloody scene. In the intro FMV, you see one member of the ship being attacked by the mysterious creature. That, unfortunately, was Parker. It's at this point that there isn't much left to do in your room aside from grab a mysterious earpiece and head out. This is where you see a big difference between this game and D. Unlike the room you were in, the corridors of the Aki are in real-time 3D, so you can freely move and look in whichever direction you'd like. While this first area is for the most part safe, there's one straight, narrow hallway that, if walked down, leads to you getting killed by one of the game's invisible creatures. So, you'll need to find a way to deal with that. You eventually reach what is basically a labyrinth, where you need to avoid the unseen aliens while making your way to Parker's room. Avoiding deadly space creatures by using a radar while navigating the depths of a spacecraft? Yeah, this game is very alien-inspired. Well, you reach Parker's room and find that he is, of course, dead. Decapitated, in fact. Pretty gruesome. Yet, this game was in fact rated T. Actually, so was D. Now, there is a somewhat infamous story of Kenji Ino sneaking more violent scenes into the final release of that game, but that was for the original 3DO release. Considering what you saw in other T-rated games from the era, such as Legacy of Kain, Soul Reaver, or Siphon Filter, I think the ESRB was just a lot more lenient back then. Anyway, in Parker's room, you find the access code to contact another member aboard the ship, Kimberly. After contacting her, it's time to make your way to her room, which isn't going to be easy. Luckily though, you soon come across something very important, a gun. But you quickly find out this isn't exactly the most useful firearm. To use it, you're required to build up a charge by holding the A button. Let go too soon, and it won't fire. Wait too long, and it won't fire either. And despite being a gun, It's a close-range weapon. So how do you use a close-range weapon on an invisible enemy? Well, the earpiece you picked up in Laura's room is actually a sort of sonar device. When an enemy is nearby, it begins to beep. The closer they are, the faster the sound is. It also sounds different depending on where they are around you. Once they get in range of killing you, you get a siren that lets you know you're about to die. But if you time your shot just right and are positioned correctly, this is when you fire your weapon and take out the enemy. It probably sounds frustrating, and it is, but it's also very satisfying when you get it right. So, after killing the enemy that blocked the initial hallway, you enter an elevator to head to the floor where Kimberly's room is located, and you quickly lose the gun you just found and are surrounded by more aliens. Great. Well, Kimberly guides you to a vent system where you do manage to find another gun. However, unlike the previous one, which let you fire several blasts before needing to recharge, this one only holds a single shot. Miss once, and you might just be screwed. Still, with this weapon, you do quickly make your way to Kimberly's room and get to finally see her in person. It's here that you find out that Parker was in fact Kimberly's husband, and she is certainly not thrilled with his death. The disc ends here. With a new disc comes a new section of the ship. The previous disc was in an area known as the Winter Tower. The next takes place on the Summer Tower. While again separated from Laura, Kimberly ends up facing the aliens alone, which leads to what looks like her death. But since you don't actually see this death, you'd be right if you assume she'll show up later. Anyway, this disc is similar to the first. You avoid your invisible foes in maze-like hallways, then find important rooms that are pre-rendered. It is a bit more intimidating in how it's presented though. There are 8 floors on the Summer Tower, which are accessed via the positioning of 3 switches. Why this elevator works this way is anyone's guess, but hey, these kinds of games need puzzles, so here you go. On this disc, you get to meet a lot more living crew members. First of all, there's George, a Japanese scientist, but then there's David, who it turns out is Laura's giant-nosed boyfriend. Seriously, look at that thing. Well, this reunion is short-lived because, as with Kimberly, David decides to run off on his own. You also quickly discover that the real motive behind your space trip was to capture and deliver the alien creatures on board, regardless of the crew's safety. After some more explorational gameplay, you find David, and he's near death. Cool. Actually, it's in this near-death state that the player discovers that David was actually an android. While it's fairly safe to assume Laura already knows this, it's still kind of hard to tell considering she never talks. This leads to a scene of Laura crying, which is actually fairly well animated for 90s CG. But then it's quickly followed up with Laura making this dumb face and shaking. Again, 90s CG. After this, things only get worse for Laura, as she gets impregnated by one of the aliens. In case you still have doubts of this game's alien inspiration. Actually, I'd say this alien pregnancy is even more disturbing, as it appears to develop inside the host's neck. Anyway, in checking this unwanted pregnancy through a body scanner, you make an even bigger revelation. Laura is also an android. I mean, I guess beforehand the game doesn't specifically tell you she is or isn't. You just assume she's human, since I guess that's just a general assumption you have when playing a game. This discovery is followed by a scene of George getting killed, and then maybe the most badass moment in the game. That's awesome. You then head off to the game's third and final disc, which brings you to the Fall Tower. It's here where you finally get a decent weapon, which charges up its shots much faster, and has a battery that seemingly never goes dead. This section of the ship seems to be the creature's nest, as everything is covered in some sort of green ooze. There are also alien larvae you need to fight. Yes, you finally get to face an enemy you can see. Luckily, these are much easier to kill, but just as satisfying when you make the shot. This is the most open section in the game. The typical hallways you're used to open out onto several large, unrestricted areas. This makes the invisible aliens, who are also present here, quite a bit more threatening. At the end of this area, you get to the closest thing this game has to a final boss. A giant pulsating heart, I guess, awaits you towards the exit. The only thing you can do is blast it. At this point, you reunite with Kimberly, who, yes, was in fact not dead. Being the good friend she is, she quickly helps you get rid of the alien living inside of you. This is yet another short-lived reunion though, as Kimberly activates the ship's self-destruct system and runs off to die next to Parker. Yeesh. Well, you don't want her to do this, so you go after her. Unfortunately, you arrive too late, and you get a fairly shocking scene. Yep, Kimberly took her own life next to her beloved Parker. This is something that most media, especially games, tends to shy away from, so it's kind of unexpected to see it here. The game also lingers on this for what seems like ages. Again, Enemy Zero is T-rated. Anyway, from this point, you're in the final stretch. You need to get out of here before the place blows up. Well, unfortunately for you, this is where your earpiece, the only thing giving you any indication of where the aliens are, ends up running out of battery. But, as luck would have it, instead of this leading to what would surely be the most frustrating section of the game, you start hearing from your deceased boyfriend, David.
Laura, can you hear me?
Apparently, he lives on through a computer chip you retrieved from his body. In a scene very reminiscent of the trench run from Star Wars, David guides you through the remaining section of the Aki. As long as you do what he says, you'll safely make it to your escape vessel and get the hell out of there. I'm not gonna lie, that's a pretty cool way to end things. After this, you enter hypersleep, see a montage of the game's events, then the credits roll, again accompanied by Michael Nyman's amazing score. At the end of these credits, you get to hear this.
Voice record number 025. Laura Lewis. I have made a confirmed sighting of the Earth's blue sky.
A happy ending. I like it. Still, you're probably thinking, hey, isn't Laura a silent protagonist? Well, kinda. As with Dee, she doesn't speak in cutscenes or during gameplay, but aside from that final voice memo, she also speaks anytime you load a saved game. Here's an example.
Voice record number 017, Laura Lewis. I've reunited with Kimberly. From Kimberly's quarters, we contacted David via video phone. We were able to confirm that he is alive, although he has sustained minor injuries. In addition, we made a positive identification of Ronnie's corpse via video phone.
That's cool. It'd be a nice surprise if it wasn't for the fact that the game's box makes a big fuss over her being voiced by Jill Cuniff of Luscious Jackson. I mean, if you bought the game based on that, you'd be very confused until you loaded a save file. And even then, you'd likely be disappointed that it's the only time you get to hear her. Speaking of the loading, the way this game handles its save system is pretty insane. To save, you need to use a voice recorder you're carrying. This recorder has a battery percentage that decreases each time you use it. That itself isn't unheard of. The original Resident Evil games had a similar limited save system where you could only save at the game's typewriters if you had one of the game's limited number of ink ribbons in your possession. However, the insane thing isn't that the saving is limited, it's that the loading is limited too. When you go to the loading screen, you'll notice that it also has a battery percentage. It's actually the same percentage you were at the last time you played. Yes, the saving and loading both use up the recorder's battery. If you run out, you have to restart the game. Can you imagine the kind of headache that would bring? That really sucks. Of course, if you play on the easy difficulty, your battery lasts much longer, which takes a bit of the stress out of this. You could also use an online guide, which would help as well. Really, a guide is pretty crucial to getting enjoyment out of this game, as there is no in-game map of the game's repetitive mazes. There are maps you can reference at the game's computers, but nothing to look at while you're out and about avoiding aliens. There was unfortunately no English language guide to this game, but there is a now very cheap Japanese guide that has all the maps you'd need. That's what I used, in conjunction with an online guide that explained what to do next. There are a few things that are worth mentioning about Enemy Zero. Once you beat the game, during your second playthrough, you can see a secret scene of Laura taking a shower. Yeah, about what you'd expect from a game of that era. Another thing, aside from the intro movie, Disc Zero also has a training mode set in VR. It initially lets you see the enemy as well as a map, but gradually removes these advantages until you're facing the enemy in an identical way to the actual game. A decent way to prepare you for things to come. Actually, it's kinda funny that this has a VR training mode, because the following year's PS1 mega hit, Metal Gear Solid, would have its own, though more fleshed out, VR mode with a similar aesthetic. Really, while the two games were released a bit too far apart for it to be intentional, Enemy Zero was almost like the Saturn's answer to MGS. It's this very cinematic, convention-breaking game made by an outspoken auteur. The difference is that MGS is one of the best games ever made, and Enemy Zero is definitely not. Still, it is worth playing. For better or worse, there really aren't a lot of games that play like Enemy Zero, and it has a great presentation for a '96 Saturn game. Though simple, it still goes places you wouldn't expect, and the soundtrack is at a level of quality that was rarely seen at the time. Though it can get frustrating, there's something about the game's interesting world and unexpected plot twists that'll likely make you curious about what you'll see next and want to push on. Plus, the frustration is kind of fitting to the genre, and was indeed intentional according to Eno. The whole timed shots and limited saves really puts you on the edge of your seat, which is something that a horror game should do, even if there are much better and more accepted ways of doing that. As with D, I think this is a game that improves when emulated. This one even more so. With the use of save states, you don't need to worry about the game's crazy save system, but it still retains a level of tension when navigating around enemies. And if you want to play the game the old-fashioned way, good on you. It's totally doable if you plan ahead of time. Well, that was the second entry of this very non-conventional series, and the last one on a 32-bit game console. But it wasn't Laura's final adventure.